Thank you for joining us today. We've got part 3 of our soil health webinar series, Soil Health, a New Approach. Today we have a couple of new guests. Dr. Ray Ward and Dr. Nick Ward are here to give the talk today. And again, we've got Patrick Freeze joining us, Willie Pretorius, both of Ward Laboratories, and then Zach Wright of Living Soil Lab. We'll follow the same format we did for the first 2 webinars, where we'll have about 20 to 25 minutes of presentation, and then the rest will be question and answer. So please put the questions in as you think of them, either in the chat box or the Q&A box, both at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to put them in as they give their presentation, and then we'll go ahead and tackle them all at the end. So I think Ray and Nick have a little bit of an introduction within their talk. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started.
All right, thanks, Hannah. We'll go ahead and get started here, and Ray and I will just kind of tag team this slideshow for a little bit here, and then we'll have plenty of time for an open discussion kind of forum. So I'm really excited about it. But today's topic, of course, is our soil health and what we're doing new around the lab.
There we go. I can say that Ward Laboratories was started in 1983. We moved to Kearney in June '83, and we got started testing soil in a 3-bay garage in November of '83. Moved into a laboratory 3,500 square feet in January of '84. '89, we moved into our own building in Industrial Park, 6,000 square feet. And so then the company kept growing. In 2000, we added on. 2015, we added on. 2021, we added on. We're up to 36,000 square feet of space now, and have over 50 people working in the lab. And so it's been very successful with the soil testing and all the other ag testing we do. And then we have soil health as part of that testing now, and it's a pretty exciting time to be talking about soil health, Nick.
Ditto. So I just been along for the ride for a little bit here since, well, some part-time in college, but full-time since 2014. And just in that short amount of time, I've seen a lot of change. So it's hard to fathom going from the start to today. It'd be pretty exciting.
I guess I could add that we started PLFA testing in 2011, and we started with the soil health testing in 2013.
And today we're talking about the next step forward.
Yes.
So a little bit to preview everybody what we're going to do for this presentation is a little bit about how and why and what Ward Laboratories is testing right now. Of course, these exciting developments that we're hinting at that are coming down the pipeline. And then our question and answer session. And then if we have any final remarks. So
and Nick, I'd like to say before we really get started too much, that I got interested in the soil health or no-till farming in 1991. I'd been following Dwayne Beck somewhat at Pierce, South Dakota, and couldn't believe some of the stuff he was doing. And I finally got convinced in 92, but 91, the reason I say that is because in southeast Nebraska, it was so dry. We had corn planted, but produced no corn because it was dried out so much. And so I was trying to figure out how to save more water. And of course, that's what Dwayne Beck was kind of promoting. And so we started with doing no-till, and I couldn't believe how much soil we saved. And you know, Dad had built terraces, we had grass waterways, we were doing all the things that kind of you're supposed to do in those days to reduce soil erosion. And yet when we started no-till farming, it became obvious that saving soil was the biggest thing that we were doing with the no-till. And now with the soil health movement, then we're trying to install other things into the no-till farming to improve the soil and all that stuff.
Very, very good. Very true. As part of this presentation, I guess Ray wanted us to first kind of review, on the soil sampling side of things. We're going to talk a lot about the results and what we're testing, but it's critical that we start with the right kind of sample first. So, most universities or institutions that recommend soil sampling, we always talk about a 0 to 6 or a 0 to 8 inch soil sample. That's for the main nutrients. And then of course, for soluble nutrients like chloride or sulfate or nitrate, we do suggest taking a subsoil sample as a way to further refine recommendations and really use that whole resource that might be available.
Nick, I'm glad you say 0 to 6 or 0 to 8, because I remember one time I had a guy say, I had to push a probe in 18 inches to get 8 inches soil. No, that's wrong. We just want to do 0 to 8 inches or 0 to 6, or however you define your depth that you want to take. And then you say, be consistent in that sampling.
Yeah. So yeah, you can have different approaches, but yeah, I think first and foremost is a constant depth is more critical than what depth you choose. Right. So, and if someone is already doing a 0 to 10 inch program, then I would say you still stick with that 0 to 10 inch program. So at least you have that sort of uniformity in your data moving. So historically, you can have that connection without too much issues. So that's taking the sample. Now, where do we take the samples from? I guess there's lots of different talk on what we're doing here, but the main idea first and foremost is a composite sample. So here we're just randomly moving around our field, collecting subsamples, mixing them in a clean plastic bucket for a composite, or for a lot of soil health type activities. Zone sampling, I think, is really where the future would lie in this kind of approach. And how do we define zones? Well, it's really up to the individual, but key points to think about is a zone is going to be anything you are willing to manage separately or differently. And then what defines the zone is really up to your imagination. It can be a yield map, it can be topography, it can be a soils map. It's whatever you as the farmer or producer decide that zone needs to be or can be.
So Nick, I would say on the zone sampling, if you mix two different soils together and one's high production and the other's low production, when you get through, you'll have a medium production. We can't tell you the good parts, we can't tell you the bad parts. So you have to sample those separately if you want to know what those issues are. And I see that the number of spots, we'd like to see what, 10 to 15 cores per zone instead of 4. So make sure that you get a good representative sample by taking 10 to 15 cores out of the sample area.
Good point. Absolutely. Okay, what to test? And I guess this is kind of if you watched any of our presentations that I guess I did over the winter, or this is pretty common to see, is that when you look at soil health indicators, you kind of have these three pools, the chemical side of things, a physical side of things, and a biological aspect. And then really soil health is going to be this part where they all join. So what we want to do is you see all three circles, we want to merge them all together into one. And we're starting to do that. And we got to be looking at all three items when we're assessing how we're doing out there in the field.
So, you stress that, Nick, and as time goes on, as we improve our soil health practices, we should make that center part bigger and bigger, and where all those merge together, like you said. So that's the goal that we're shooting for.
And so what kind of falls within these things? And this is a chart based on some information of what we can do, and these are a lot of different parameters that we don't have them all tied together at this time, but they're different things that we've added over the years, and you can kind of see where they fall within their different pools. So a lot of the chemical things are long-standing things that a lot of people are familiar with. The physical indicators, some of these are more recent with the aggregate stability, of course. And then, of course, lots of fun, exciting biological indicators, biomass, respiration, enzyme activity, the epoxy or ACE protein. There's still a lot, there's just more and more things all the time. And they really have some excitement, I guess, coming.
Well, it's the interesting part of trying to assess the soil health is that it seems like the more parameters we can test, the better feeling we have on how healthy our soil is.
Mm-hmm. Now, so what can we do though to kind of take these into one? Well, that's what our soil health assessment is. And here's our example. This is our new test that we've started running here just within the last month or so. That incorporates all three of those kind of pools. We have the chemical fraction of chemical portion of parameters. They're highlighted in that orange color, including pH, organic matter, our different secondary, macro, secondary, and micronutrient testing. The biological aspect of things with CO2, using that water extract to look at pools of carbon and nitrogen that biological or the microbial community will be accessing, and then a little bit of calculations. And then finally, and I think what really sets this apart is this introduction of a physical parameter as part of this test, and that's that aggregate stability.
And the aggregate stability, that we've kind of modified the test because in the aggregate stability test, normally you have to get the aggregates and then you add a dispersing agent to break the aggregates down so they go through the sieve, and then the aggregates that are left, so to speak, after that is done as sand. And these are sand particles in a 0.25 to 2 millimeter diameter, which are large sand grains that act like aggregates as far as the soil capable of taking water. So we decided that if we had the large sand grains, and I say large sand grains because sand goes down to 0.05 millimeter and so we're not measuring the sand in the 0.05 to 0.25 millimeter diameter, just the ones that are larger than that. And so they act like stable aggregates. And then we can know that the soil is going to take water faster if we have a high aggregate stability. And I've seen so far on the tests, the aggregate stability ranging from about 15 up to close to 90. So we're getting quite a range on that kind of testing, and look forward to helping you decide if you're really improving your soil with that aggregate stability.
So I think it'd be interesting to see, that soil that would have had that 15% on the aggregate stability, since it includes sand grains, it could really seal up and really be reluctant to take water.
Yeah,
infiltration would be really hampered.
With that low a number, there's not any sand in it. It's a pretty clayey soil. So yeah, if you don't have aggregate stability there, you're not going to get water intake. And so it's a very important test as far as the physical part of our soil health assessment.
So I think that's going to be one of those things that as we talk about learning more about soil health and wanting to add to it, this is going to be a key parameter and really helping us understand and reflect those positive changes.
Let me say on the soil health or on the soil respiration is an indication of microbial biomass in the soil. And then the carbon is really a source of food. And a lot of times when we see really high CO2 respiration, like 200 or 300, the carbon is low. And so when you got a great big system of life, and you're trying to feed it, it takes a lot more food. I think if most people understand that, I think if you have 10 cows and you're trying to feed them what 100 cows it takes, then there's going to be a lot of waste. But if you got 400 cows, you only got feed for 100, then there's going to be a lot of starving. So think about that as you kind of want to match that CO2 respiration and the carbon. And of course, you have to have a balance of the carbon nitrogen because nitrogen is a protein. And we look at that carbon nitrogen ratio, really ideally between 8 and 15. And I see a few above 20, but most of our carbon nitrogen ratios are in that, 10 to 20 range. So I think we're doing a pretty good job there, but I see the low carbon, meaning that we need to feed the microbes more. And how do you do that? Well, the guy's been talking about that, but that's cover crops. So they come in and so the new plant's growing, the roots leaking out exudates or photosynthates that's feeding the microbes. And so that you can see a demand when you see that, if you need to really be ramping up plant growth.
Yeah, perfect. See, he was concerned that he was getting a cough and he was going to lose his voice, but you get him on a passionate subject and it just starts coming. So the second, there is a second part to the soil health assessment test, and that's we are able to provide a sum of cations in a base saturation, since we are using ammonium acetate for those macronutrients and secondary nutrients, which is a great contribution to understanding some of the physical parameters of your soil. And then of course we still have all the fertility recommendations, and from our previous soil health tests that we've done, if you're familiar with that nitrogen recommendation scheme, that carries directly over to our new soil health assessment. The N recommendation combines the nitrate, the ammonium that's found in the soil, along with that calculated N release. So, we have a uniformity of what we've been doing for the past decade now, as far as nitrogen recommendations. But P and K and the different secondary and micronutrients are all based on more traditional testing with correlation and calibration. So you can be confident, despite where, no matter where you are geographically, wherever you are on soil pH range, that you'll get a true, very sound phosphorus recommendation, and then micronutrient recommendations as well. So I think that's critical that,
Well, yeah, I'm glad you said that about the phosphorus, because in some areas we'll run Olsen P in the calcareous soils of Western United States. And our normal phosphorus test, as you'll see on the example, is Malic 3 phosphorus. But we can run Malic 3 or Olsen, and there are a few requests for Bray P1 and P2. So we're capable of doing all those. So we can provide the fertility, and the nitrogen is the one that really helps to reduce and I think make the nitrogen recommendations more accurate, is including the organic nitrogen release and ammonium, which is two tests that we have kind of missed in the way we're doing our nitrogen tests before. And we might add that you showed the picture of the subsoils, so 8 to 36 inches and that kind of thing. So if you really want to know the subsoil nitrate, then take an 8 to 24 or 8 to 36 inch sample for subsoil nitrate that we can tie then to this nitrogen rec. Now, I should say this, that if you don't send it in, we just assume there's 25 pounds in that subsoil. So we're including a nitrogen that might be deeper in the root zone that we're not testing with our surface sample we talked about.
That's absolutely correct. So that's kind of what we're at today, but what does the future hold? And I think really the focus is that soil health is more than a single test. I think, everyone, as you've listened to the previous webinars and you listen today, it's something that continually evolves and is added to and built upon. So what do we have? Well, we got more to incorporate into our soil health assessment that we have. We know that we can do these things now, but like total nutrient digest, there's another chemical parameter that we can add.
Let me say what that total nutrient digest is. That it's fun to look at the test. I was taught as a soil fertility guy, you don't ever look at those tests, but as a soil health people and getting more soil life and trying to have organisms that are using some of these insoluble, so to speak, plant nutrients. So the total nutrient digest, like on phosphorus, we'll show 2,500 to 4,000 pounds of phosphate in the top, top 8 inches soil. Potassium could be up, probably maybe to 20,000 pounds. And it just is amazing that we know those are not available, but as we have more soil life and mycorrhiza fungi in the soil, the more of these will become available, or those organisms can make some of those nutrients available. And so that's an important part. So you can see what your soil has for total nutrients. So you have some idea how many years you could go maybe without worrying too much about how many nutrients to put on.
Excellent. And so then moving on to texture and water holding capacity, these are physical parameters that we can do today that we hope to add into this report. Of course, the PLFA that we've talked about in previous webinars, and of course we've done a fair amount of work here at the lab on that, and have a very good understanding and grasp. And then some newer things, ACE protein and epoxy. These are some different ways to look at that nitrogen pool and the carbon pool that are just out there that, there's still lots of talk about them if you see different publications or different talks. So some more to consider, of course. The next thing would also be to put some of these in more graphical reports. I think right now we have a table, which is nice, but a lot of learners out there, if we could have some more charts or some more a better way to visualize the data that really goes to help understand what they're testing and how the results look. Something that we're announcing today that's very exciting is that we're also going to add some soil DNA work. So we're partnering with Trace Genomics to offer soil DNA analysis. This combines, they really the next step, and they've got an industry-leading approach where they do whole genome sequencing. So they're collecting approximately 4 to 5 gigabytes of data per soil sample, which is just an enormous amount of information. So they've got some different tools to help break that down and make that understandable. Of course, we're not going to be looking at an entire Excel page with every cell filled with a number. But some of the things they're wanting to do is they're measuring that diversity of availability to really, in oxygen availability to paint a picture of soil health. And then one of the really interesting things is based on some of the data that we're going to collect with those samples is that we can identify a little over 170 different pathogens for 70 different crop types. So from a farmer here in central Nebraska that has corn, we can look at different pathogens there. Likewise, if we have a grower in the Pacific Northwest with some fruit trees, well, we might be able to help there as well. So there'll be a lot of cool information to garner and really learn there. So
then Nick, before you go on, you mentioned oxygen availability as part of their measurement there, and it made me think about when you talked about the aggregate stability, that the important part of the soil structure is to be able to have air go into the soil as the plants use water, that air comes in. That's oxygen coming in for the microbes and for the roots to grow. And roots need oxygen to take up nutrients. So that, that openness is really important. And this would be another way to measure that, I guess. But I just thought of that I mentioned the air movement in the soil is very important for the microbial life.
Absolutely. So I guess at this time, we will pause and then just allow for our question and answer period and see what we can have. So take it away, Hannah, on directing that.
Absolutely. That was great. I know there's a lot of excitement around the lab for all of that those new tests that Nick talked about. So we've all been working hard on that, and we're excited to get it going. We did have several questions come in. These are great, and we'll start off a great discussion. We've got all 5 of our experts here, so feel free to keep dropping them in. If we don't get to them all today, we do have a YouTube channel where we try to answer some frequently ask questions. So make sure to follow that, subscribe, and then we'll get this recording up and then also tackle any questions we don't get to today. Okay, so first question, good question here. In a no-till environment, isn't it prudent to discard the top 2 inches plus or minus to receive the effect, or excuse me, to remove the effects of stratification for phosphorus and potassium?
And I have a hard time hearing, Hannah. What is?
So the idea is, if you're in a no-till environment, do you need to remove the top 2 inches of your sample before to remove that area of stratified nutrients at the surface?
Oh, the stratified is what I missed.
Yeah.
I think my comment is a little bit cynical, but if you're trying to sell fertilizer to a farmer, yeah, take the top 2 inches off, because that's where most of the fertilizer is. So it's just, no, you take it from the top. If you want to scrape some of the residue away, I'd take all the soil. Stratification is a word I don't use. It's called nutrient nutrient distribution. So it's because if you put fertilizer in the soil, like phosphorus or manure, the plants will take it up, the residue goes out back on top of the ground. You can put the manure or phosphorus on top of the ground, the plants take it up and put it back on top of the ground. No matter where you put the fertilizer, the residue is going to be on top. So it's a natural phenomena, and that's why the topsoil is so valuable in growing crops. And when the pioneers broke the land, all the nutrients in that top layer, and so it I think is very important part of the whole evaluation.
And just to add on to that, that if you think about the original way we I guess did production ag with tilling and soil sampling to 8 inches, is that we still accounted for all those nutrients. You might have been incorporating and mixing everything with plowing or disking. So all the ways we interpret the numbers are still based on that total pool. And if you're still going 0 to 6 or 0 to 8, it doesn't matter that we've changed the way the nutrients are distributed in that profile, but we're still accounting for that entire pool of nutrients. So once again, that's why, I second the thought of it's still critical to take 0 to 8 or 0 to 6 inches with those soil samples, despite being in a no-till environment. Yeah.
Whatever depth you want, but yeah, I was just thinking something else and it passed by. So
yeah.
Next question, I guess.
Next one. Okay, we got a lot of them coming in. This is great. When did you all begin testing heavy metals, and how can we request this when sending in samples?
Yep, great question. So as far as how long, it's been about a year and a half, 2 years on some of the sending in questions. I don't know if Patrick would have anything specifically to add to that.
Yeah, I think you typically, it just kind of depends on the affected area or the metal of concern. I think you kind of soil it or sample it just like you would a nutrient analysis. So either the 0 to 6 or 0 to 8, usually a little bit more shallow is fine, like 0 to 6 would be fine. But getting a lot of site history, as much information as you can about, the metals of concern. And I think so I guess Nick would probably chime in on this, but heavy metals and water analysis, I guess, is it the same sort of testing that we do for that?
Yeah. So it's the same metals, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So sometimes those typically will go hand in hand. So sometimes the metals can come from a water source, and the soil is just like a sponge. It just sucks up a lot of these metals. But usually it's in the top. I would say like 10 centimeters of the profile, especially if it's recent. They will migrate with time, but it takes quite a while. But you just sample it just like you would for nutrient analysis.
In the heavy metal test, would probably be more logical around industrial sites and that kind of thing. Out in the open agricultural land, probably not to worry about heavy metals.
Yeah, in Washington State, we had that issue mostly from lead arsenic pesticides that they use in the old orchards for decades and decades. But that was really specific. Yeah, like you said, it's mostly industrial areas that really are affected nowadays.
Perfect. Okay, next question. Zach and Willie, you two might be able to chime in on this one. I have a good sized garden in my backyard in Denver, and in getting the ground ready for planting, I don't see a lot of worms. Should I add them?
Yeah, you could even source night crawlers, fishing night crawlers. That would be a good thing to put in there. If you did red wigglers, like the composting worms, they're not going to overwinter. At least if we have a hard winter. You being in Denver, you might have, a mild enough winter that they would overwinter as well. But yeah, when in doubt, add worms. I mean, that seems like a good thing to always pump into the system.
All right. Okay, here's another sampling question. How do you deal with the surface plants and grass clumps when sampling?
Surface grass and root clumps when soil sampling.
I would guess I would sample those. When we process the samples here, we crush the soil and then sieve it, and the coarse stuff is sieved off, so it doesn't really interfere with our soil sample.
Yeah.
And
So some material, inevitably makes it through the sieve, but the idea that it's tried to remove it, but in a strong thatch, I guess, yes, it's a challenge to get around that. But I would still send it in. Once again, because those are where the nutrients are. So if we were to discard that, we might find that we might be artificially reducing our fertility. So I don't think it'd be right to discard that, but yeah, challenging question for sure.
well,
If I can just say something on sampling for soil health, I think we find quite big differences in the analysis sampling the within the root zone compared to the bulk soil. Everything in soil health happens within the root zone, and that's where you wanna measure and see what's happening. So I always recommend to our clients to do as much of the sampling within the root zone rather than in the bulk soil area.
Great point.
Okay, next question is regarding aggregate stability. How do the aggregate stability values on your test compare to reference values with the unmodified test, if at all? It would be good to compare
the
values.
aggregate stability test modified has sand grains in it, and I really haven't seen enough comparisons to know for sure exactly what this would be. But if we have high aggregate stability, we know that the CEC is lower, which is an indicator of more sand and not as much clay. So if you have a sandy soil, we are not supposed to do aggregate stability in the conventional method, because it says if you have over 50% sand, you're supposed to report not accurate test, that you can't give aggregate stability. So if you have a sand and you're asking for aggregate stability modified, you're going to get that high reading, even though there may not be a lot of aggregates. They're all sand, large sand grains. So this is a thing that Willie and I talked about a little bit. Is I said, if it's a sand grain that's the size of an aggregate, what makes a difference if it's a sand grain or an aggregate? And he assured me there was no difference in water intake. Of course, it'd be on some other things, but so you kind of have to, if you have a silt loam soil, there's probably not going to be very much difference. But if you have a sandy loam soil or a loamy sand, you're going to see a big difference in the comparison.
I think it's important to try and correlate your on-farm water infiltration with the aggregate stability numbers which comes out of the lab. because there has to be a good correlation. So ultimately, by doing the aggregate stability, you'll be able to work out what your infiltration rates are just by an extrapolation technique. I think a lot of these things work together, and by getting more and more information on the same parameter gives you a much better indication of exactly where you stand, particularly when we're looking at sandy soils where we find it very difficult to actually do an aggregate stability test, but you do get good infiltration. So by doing an infiltration test where we have a problem with the measuring of the aggregate stability is an alternative measure, because ultimately what you want to measure is how much of the water that I receive either through irrigation or through rainfall am I capturing, and how much am I storing? And I think we also have to bring into this context the water holding ability. So then you will know how much am I infiltrating, and how much of that am I storing, and that one can do at a deeper and deeper in depth, because as your soil health improves with over time, you're going to get better and better depth soil health with improved water holding capacity.
Absolutely. Next question, going back to the assumption of 25 pounds of N at deeper depths, does that assumption differ in irrigated or dryland or rain-fed areas?
No, it would be uniform no matter where the sample comes from.
With the exception, there's always the exception to everything, of course, but if I identify the soil in the cups when it's ready for analysis, and if it looks sandy, which means it's really sandy, if it looks sandy to the eyeball, then we mark it as a 1 on the test report, and that means it's a sandy soil, and we assume two, which would be 10 pounds per acre, 2 part per million, 10 pounds per acre in the subsoil and sandy soils, 25 pounds on loams and silt loams and clay loams.
Yep. And those are assumptions, and an assumption is just that. And so if you are curious about your actual,
Hannah,
yes.
the question on the dry land versus irrigated,
Mhm.
it probably depends a little bit on water management, but most of the guys are shutting their water off fairly decent time. And the irrigated, lots of times they have more subsoil nitrate than dry land. It depends on if the dry land is an irrigator, then the dry land might be higher in heck in nitrate because they put the same rate on or something. But I see quite a variability. And after soybeans, you have less nitrate in the soil than you do after corn, which is kind of interesting to me.
Yeah. And I think I understand this question to be about our assumptions if we don't have a deep sample. So the best recommendation, if you are curious about the deep nitrates, is just to test for your own farm so that you know what you have to work with. Okay, we have just a few questions on cost of different tests. So let's tackle those all at once. Is the total nutrient digest available now? Yes, it is. And what does that cost? That test is $38 per sample. We also had a question on the cost of the soil health assessment, and that one is $52 per sample. And then there was a question on the cost of the DNA testing, and Nick, I'll let you take that one.
Yep. So that should be $190 a sample. And then, yeah, we will have some more information come out tomorrow with Trace on some of those parameters. So I guess stay tuned, and you should see that on our website here shortly as well. So
yes. Okay. Just wanted to clarify that the recommendation for 10 to 15 core samples in each zone is that 10 to 15 cores should be composited for a single sample to submit, not 10 to 15 submitted samples per zone.
Correct.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. It's,
Yeah,
that's the
correct.
composite from the zone is 10 to 15 cores.
And-
And it's one
and-
sample. Yep.
Nick
Okay.
said, clean plastic bucket. Make sure that the bucket is clean. You put the cores in there, you mix those up, you crush them, mix them up, and then you take your representative sample out. And sometimes growers, they get the bag full and there's still soil in the bucket. You can go ahead and dump that on the ground. It won't hurt anything. I find that interesting. They don't know. You got the bag full, it's still in the bucket. Yeah, but that's why you want to mix it up. So you get a good representative sample out of those 10 to 15 cores.
And I think just remove the excessive organic, undecomposed organic material that's lying on top.
What is a reasonable time frame or expectation to begin seeing positive trends in soil testing results? That's a great question.
I think it depends on really how serious you are with getting your soil regenerated. I've seen results in a matter of 18 months to 2 years where the stable carbon has moved one and possibly even more than one percentage point in the right direction. But then you have to almost take that piece of ground out and do cover crops, bring the animal component in and do intensive grazing. Then you'll see the positive influences quite soon. It is really a function of how serious you are about not trying to do cropping together with regeneration. I think it's important if you can afford it, to just divide your farm into areas where you have one area that is continuously under the regeneration stage, if it's at all possible. I know it's not always possible, but I think for those farmers that have been able to do that, they've really reaped the benefits from that practice.
Did you have any thoughts in Ray on
I
that? Okay.
I couldn't.
No. Okay.
Sorry.
Apologize here, my internet's being a little finicky, so hopefully I'm not jumping over anyone here. Are we ready for the next one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, good question here. Does the soil health assessment also cover total nutrient digest and or soil respiration?
So it covers soil respiration, but not the total nutrient digest.
Correct.
The total nutrient digest needs to be requested in addition to the soil health assessment.
Yes. Okay. Okay, is it important with irrigation to create wetter and drier conditions over each week or so to turn over the air in the soil, kind of like breathing, or is constant water levels better?
I would say if you had constant water and it was too high, then you wouldn't have enough oxygen for good plant growth and good root growth, and for the microbial population. While there'd be microbes that go anaerobic, it would survive, and it changes that population. The idea that it dries and then you wet it and then it dries, it simulates more of rainfall kind of thing, and so the natural system would be kind of a wet and dry system. And of course, then with rain fed, you're always worried about not getting enough water on the irrigation. We can take care of that. But Nick, I don't know. If you
Yeah,
have,
no, yeah, you gotta allow it to dry out, certainly for that air exchange, and yeah. Mother Nature doesn't keep stuff at a constant moisture level, so if that's what we're trying to do, we need to allow periods where we have drier soil, and then we re-wet. So
incidentally, on our soil health assessment test, on the iron test, we can tell if somebody's overwatering because when you have overwater, you have a lack of oxygen, and that makes the iron soil test higher. And sometimes people, especially gardens, asking questions why things are not growing. And I look at the iron test and say, I think you're overwatering. And so that's important to always manage your water properly.
All right, ready for the next one?
go ahead, Amy.
Okay, I keep freezing here, so making things a little challenging. Many farm operations have root crops such as potatoes, peanuts, sugar beets, etc. that require digging. What impact on soil aggregates, water infiltration, and soil health do the root crops have, either positive or negative? This is a good one.
It's unfortunate that those crops unfortunately do need a certain amount of tilling and working, and it would be a good idea to maybe alternate those crops with crops that need less working. That's about the only recommendation I have for those things, because I've seen potato growers, you just can't grow potatoes on a large scale without the working. Although there are some growers that have incorporated some very good soil health principles within their potato crop production.
Well, I think if they dig the crop and then plant a cover crop to kind of reestablish aggregate stability, and if you do other crops besides the root crops, you're probably not, you still could hold the soil structure pretty good. If you're doing this peanuts, and the one I have example is peanuts and cotton year after year, and they thought they had salinity problems in their water. And when I saw the analysis, the water was okay, the soil was okay, but the pictures showed a desert type thing because it had no organic matter left because of no residue, no cover crop in the digging of the peanuts. And so you have to really kind of get out and observe the soil, see what's going on, and then think about how to improve that. And the living root, we talk about the living root in the soil at all times is the best way to keep the soil in good condition.
Okay. Ray mentioned that he became convinced of the efficacy of no-till in 1992. What were the barriers to adopting no-till in 1992, and what are the barriers into the future?
So the interesting part of that story was that in 92, I was convinced that we need to do no-till, and I went to my nephew that was farming our farm and said, we're going to start no-till. And he said, well, I have to disc everything to smooth it. So 93 did that. In 94, we got started in no-till. He did not change any equipment. He started no-tilling. And to me, when people say some things, granted, we learned some things as we went along, but we did not change any equipment to get started in the no-till farming. And so it's an interesting thing to think about, but that's my little experience.
So you'd say, probably equipment barriers were maybe greater, or I guess the lack of understanding back then was.
It was probably like a more understanding, but I sure knew what hairpinning meant in the wheat stubble. So
Okay, another one from the Q&A box. If I have a very clay soil, greater than 50% clay, can I still get high aggregate stability even though it has more to do with clay content and not microbially driven aggregate formation?
So can I answer that?
Sure.
It goes back to a story from South Dakota. In western South Dakota, the Pierce Shale soils are very high clay soils. And the clays in certain kind of conditions will coagulate together and act like aggregates. And they had a certain kind of conditions, and they had a windstorm come through, and the clay soil had more wind erosion than most sandy soils did at that time, because those aggregates were at that certain stage, which is it's a chemistry. It's a calcium and magnesium in the soil also that helps to form those kind of chemical aggregates at that time. It wasn't organic, and so if you don't have any aggregates, the soil is going to seal. And the only way you get water in is for big cracks to occur, and so the water runs down the cracks. Willie, I don't know if you have any more.
And I guess those soils were not covered by any vegetation.
Yeah, they one thing we didn't talk about in this soil health thing is that in the no-till and the cover, the biggest culprit on a lot of our erosion is raindrop splash. The raindrop pounded on bare soil. We in our aggregate stability test, we dip the soil very slowly for 3 minutes. Now, but if you have an inch of rain, you have enough energy to plow the soil about 6 inches deep. I remember an old soil conservation book, and so you have a tremendous amount of energy hitting that soil, and it'll break the sand, silt, and clay particles apart. And of course, then the clay seals, so the soil doesn't take water. So in the rainfall simulators, with applying 1.5 inches to 2 inches of water in a pan that's 2.5 inches deep, water won't go through that soil if it's tilled and has no structure, because the clays just break apart from the aggregates and seal the thing right away, so water won't go in.
I think at the end of the day, it's bare soils that create or present themselves for a problem, and the only way that you can combat that is with the living root and hopefully a diverse plant situation that will, whether you have sandy soils, whether you have clay soils, whether you have loamy soils. I think those principles apply to all of the soil types. I think Ray just explained what happens with the clay soil that shouldn't be wind eroded. But if it's going to be bare, non-covered, you're going to lose you're going to lose some of the soil with the wind erosion.
And Willie, I should say that we got clays that are 2-to-1 clays, or bentonite or montmorillonite type clays, smectite clays. You got kaolinite type clays that are 1-to-1, silicate, aluminum, and then you got aluminum clays. And so there's tremendous differences in the clays, how they react in different parts of the world.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question, maybe two, depending on how long this one takes, but is the results of the soil health parameters influenced significantly by the time of year sampled? I'll let you answer that one, and then there's more that goes along with it.
Yeah, I think I saw that question in the Q&A. For soil health analysis, it's important to establish a baseline, and the best baseline that you can establish on a farm is an unworked area or a virgin piece of soil on your farm that represents the rest of the farm reasonably well. You take a sample from that and regard that as the baseline which nature provided you with all the resources that you had on the farm before you started. As you start working your soil, and whether it's regenerative or whether it's conventional, something's going to happen, and then the soil health measurements have to be, or any soil test for that matter, is better taken at the same time of the year every time, so that you decrease the variances that can occur within seasons and time. So to summarize, have a baseline on your farm and do your soil health sampling every time at the same time of the year, no matter what time. For me, I would think that water sampling would be best done in just before planting or just after planting. I don't know whether you would agree with that, Ray.
Comments on what time of the year to sample for soil health analysis?
No, I think Willie covered it.
Okay.
Okay.
I get, yeah, probably just a second Willie's idea there is, it's probably more in the springtime would be better, and more, if all possibility of having some sort of a living root in the soil at the time of sampling too, that would probably help. But that, I know that creates limitations then for using the fertility recommendations. So.
But Nick, the important thing is, and I think, I speak to you guys a lot about this, is to have a baseline on your farm that nature provided you with before you started farming. Because from that baseline, you are going to either decrease the soil health, or if in a regenerative situation, you can actually improve it from there. But it's important to know where you started from and how you over the years progress, so that you can remedy the faults before they get out of hand.
One final question, Hannah.
Yes, I wasn't sure if you were done or if I was frozen. Sorry about that. Okay, here's the part 2 to that question. If you're looking to establish and track trends and improvement, what is the recommended sampling and testing frequency? And should the full suite of tests be repeated every time, or can the testing be optimized once a baseline is known?
I guess it probably makes a lot of difference on what one you're looking at, but it's going to take some time to see differences. I think I would do an annual sampling at the same time until you can kind of establish some trend lines, and so then you might, unless you're curious about what a certain crop is doing, you could sample them. But it's the interesting part to me is to ask a lab man how many times you take soil samples, and we have a tendency to encourage sampling more. And I always teach farmers, you don't go to the pickup store to see if you need a new pickup. It's hard to ask a lab man how often you should take samples. And so, Zach, I don't know if you have any comments on that, but.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. Just really, it's about consistency each year. So
Yeah.
just try to do it at whatever time you start. Try to repeat that every year, or once a week. It's kind of.
All right, well, that wraps us up with 1 o'clock. There were a couple questions on the DNA testing that we didn't get to, but we'll be putting out a video specifically about that next Tuesday. So subscribe on YouTube, follow along on our social media platforms, and we'll answer some of those questions there. Otherwise, great discussion today. And in parts 1 and 2, thank you so much for your interest in our series and for tuning in and for providing a great discussion. If your question was not answered, you can always just contact the lab and we'll get you to the right person. So with that, that's all we've got for you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Buddy, happy spring.